Here's something that should genuinely unsettle you. The people who join cults are not, on average, less intelligent than everyone else. Some of the most well-documented cult members in history were doctors, engineers, lawyers, people with sharp analytical minds who you'd assume would see the trap coming from a mile away. And yet they didn't, and the reason they didn't has almost nothing to do with intelligence and almost everything to do with a very specific, very well-engineered sequence of psychological steps that most of us have never been taught to recognize. Let's start with the part almost nobody expects, the recruitment moment itself, because it rarely looks anything like what you picture. There's no dramatic speech about a secret doctrine on day one. There's no immediate ask for money or loyalty. What actually happens first is something researchers call love bombing, an overwhelming, almost disorienting wave of warmth, attention, and validation directed at a new person, often at exactly the moment they're going through something hard, a breakup, a move to a new city, a rough patch at work. You get showered with compliments, invited everywhere, made to feel like you've finally found people who truly understand you. It feels wonderful. It's also almost never accidental. People who study these groups have found that love bombing specifically targets a basic human need, belonging, and it works fastest on people going through a period of genuine loneliness or transition, which describes an enormous number of otherwise smart, capable, put-together people at some point in their lives. Here's a curiosity gap worth sitting with. Why does this warmth eventually start to feel conditional? Because that's exactly the second phase, and it's engineered to arrive slowly enough that you don't notice the shift while it's happening. The same intense attention that made you feel special starts getting subtly withdrawn whenever you push back, question something, or express doubt, and it comes flooding back the moment you fall back in line. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement, the same unpredictable reward pattern that makes slot machines so compelling, except here the reward isn't a jackpot, it's approval from people who've become your entire social world. You start adjusting your behavior to chase that approval back, often without ever consciously deciding to. Now let's talk about isolation, because this is where things get structurally serious. Most people assume cults isolate members through obvious physical control, locking doors, cutting off phones. That happens in extreme cases, but the far more common and far more effective method is social, not physical. Groups will subtly encourage members to spend less time with friends and family who don't understand the new path they're on, framing outside relationships as distractions or even threats to personal growth. This isn't announced as a rule. It happens gradually, through scheduling, through group activities that fill up every evening, through gentle suggestions that old friendships were holding you back. By the time a member's external support network has thinned out significantly, the group has become, quite literally, their primary source of connection, validation, and belonging, which makes leaving feel less like walking away from a bad situation and more like losing everyone they have left. Let's talk about commitment, because there's a specific psychological principle at work here that has almost nothing to do with belief and everything to do with behavior. It's called the foot-in-the-door technique, and it's been studied in social psychology for decades. The first ask is always small. Attend one meeting, read one pamphlet, donate a small, almost token amount. Each small yes makes the next, slightly bigger yes easier to give, because humans have a deep psychological drive to stay consistent with choices they've already made. Once you've agreed to something small, backing out of a slightly bigger version of the same thing later starts to feel like admitting the first choice was wrong, and most people would rather keep going than admit that. Cult recruitment almost never asks for total devotion up front, because total devotion up front would trigger every alarm bell a rational person has. It asks for a series of small, reasonable-sounding steps, each one just slightly bigger than the last, until the final position looks nothing like where the person started, and yet every single step along the way felt like their own decision. There's a language shift that tends to happen around the same time, one that's easy to miss because it feels like learning the culture of a new group rather than anything more serious. New vocabulary gets introduced, special terms for insiders and outsiders, phrases that reframe ordinary concepts in ways only members fully understand. Researchers who study high-control groups call this loaded language, and its function is subtle but powerful. It doesn't just describe the group's beliefs, it starts to replace the vocabulary a person would otherwise use to question them. If the only available words for doubt have already been redefined as weakness or as a symptom of not yet understanding deeply enough, doubt itself becomes harder to even formulate as a clear thought, let alone say out loud to someone who might talk you out of it. This is also exactly why intelligence doesn't protect anyone here, and it's worth sitting with why. Smart, analytical people are often even better at justifying decisions after the fact than less analytical people are. because they're skilled at building logical-sounding explanations for whatever they've already committed to. Researchers studying cognitive bias have found that higher cognitive ability doesn't reduce motivated reasoning, the tendency to rationalize what you already believe or have already invested in. It often sharpens it. A smart person doesn't ask, "Is this group manipulating me?" They ask, "Given everything I already know and have experienced here, does this make sense?" And by the time that question gets asked, dozens of small, consistent commitments have already been made, and the analytical brain gets very good at building a bridge that justifies all of them. There's also a financial layer to almost every well-known case, and it deserves mention because it's rarely just about belief. Sunk cost plays an enormous role. Once someone has donated money, given up a job, or moved away from their previous life to join a group, walking away doesn't just mean admitting a mistake. It means admitting that everything already given up was given up for nothing. That's an extraordinarily painful thing for anyone to accept, and the more someone has already sacrificed, the harder that admission becomes, which is precisely why groups often escalate financial and lifestyle commitments gradually rather than all at once. So what actually protects someone from falling into a cult or a controlling group? Most people think the answer is intelligence. They believe that smart or educated people could never be manipulated like that. But real cases show something different. People from every background have joined cults. Intelligence alone is not the best protection. The real protection is much simpler: keeping strong relationships with people outside the group. Experts who study cults have found one thing in almost every successful escape story. The person still had someone on the outside who never completely gave up on them. It could be a parent, a brother or sister, an old friend, or even a former coworker. They kept checking in without judging or attacking them. Even when the person seemed completely devoted to the group, that outside connection stayed alive. When doubts finally appeared, that relationship became a way back. This matters because isolation is one of the first goals of any controlling group. If they can separate you from family and friends, it becomes much easier to control how you think. Without outside opinions, the group's version of reality slowly becomes the only one you hear. That's why staying connected to people outside the group is so important. A single trusted relationship can remind someone that another life still exists. Once you understand how these groups work, you start seeing the same patterns in smaller ways all around you. They often begin with love bombing, where someone receives constant praise, attention, and kindness. Then comes intermittent approval, where praise and criticism are mixed together. Because the rewards become unpredictable, people work even harder to earn them. Next comes gradual isolation. At first, you're only asked to spend a little more time with the group and a little less time with people who don't understand. Then those outside relationships slowly fade away. Another common method is the foot-in-the-door technique. Small requests become bigger ones over time. Since every step feels reasonable, people rarely notice how much they've already given. Then comes the sunk cost trap. After spending years, giving money, or building your identity around the group, leaving feels impossible. People think, "I've already invested so much, I can't walk away now." The surprising part is that these same methods appear outside cults too. Some high-pressure workplaces, unhealthy relationships, and aggressive sales programs use similar tactics. The difference is usually how extreme they become, not the methods themselves. Understanding these patterns doesn't mean becoming afraid of every group or community. It simply means recognizing when influence turns into control. And the strongest protection is often the simplest one. Keep people in your life who care about you, respect your questions, and never ask you to cut yourself off from everyone else.